Imagine the federal government let you boost the growth of your tax-free wealth and let you make your employer help. What if they also made the IRS refrain from forcing you to make IRA withdrawals until as late as you're age 75? And what if they made it easier to write off even more of your charitable giving when funded through your IRA? Stay tuned as we explain these and other changes that could be coming soon, right now on the Retirement Lifestyle Show. Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm one of your co-hosts, Erik Olson, and with me today is only one of our other two co-hosts, Adrian Nicholson. Roshan Lungani is out for the day. Adrian, how you doing? And since the last time we spoke, what's been big for you?
I'm doing good, Erik. It's good to be here on another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I think we have a very interesting and informative episode for our listeners today. Just excited just to get into it. Everything's been pretty busy on my end, but busy this time of year is really good. So I'm all set. How about you, Erik? It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's been big. I had since we last spoke, I finished up this one fantastic estate planning conference called the Heckerling Institute. And that was literally 4.5 days of nonstop content from some of the top estate planning minds in the country. I just feel always so challenged by that because it's not my main domain. And so that was great. And now I'm out in Seattle with my eldest daughter and her family. This morning got to snuggle up with the little granddaughters, and it's just everybody's so excited. So this is great. Hey, what were you doing Monday night, though?
Oh, I was just watching the big game, the Kansas and UNC game. That was really fun. It came down to the wire, so that was fun to watch.
I guess it was one of the biggest comebacks in NBA Finals history.
Yeah, this whole tournament was a lot of fun to watch. There was just a lot of good teams, just exciting games. So it was really fun to really see some of the top competitors play in these intense games.
Yeah. And then Roshan, if he were here, we could probably see him gloating a little bit because he kind of got his wish, right? Which was to see Duke knocked out before it made it all the way. So
yeah, that was another really good game. I mean, it was definitely worth the wait this year for the March Madness tournament. So it was really exciting.
Yeah, really good stuff. Well, listeners, today we're talking about an area of this. I don't think that we actually ever touched on this before. We're looking at pending legislation rather than at or a bill that at least has passed the House, but that hasn't passed the Senate. It hasn't been passed into law. So in some ways, it would be, I think we would normally look at this as a little premature to have a conversation about this, but because this House, the bill in the House was passed with an overwhelming majority, 414 votes yay and some very small number nay, it looks like it's probably a shoo-in to make it to the president's desk, and probably also will be signed with such strong bipartisan support. So we thought we'd talk about this. So what is it? It's about retirement and retirement planning, or at least some of the variables that would go into retirement planning. And specifically, it's being labeled Secure Act 2.0. The reason, what is 2.0? Well, back in December of 2019, the first of this sequence of significant changes to some of the retirement rules were made, with things, for example, extending the required minimum distribution age from 70 and a half to 72, and many other sorts of important changes. This one is going to take some of that idea and drive it even further, or at least it will if it's signed into law. So we thought we'd spend some time talking with you about this, because this will have ramifications for most of our listeners, who, whether it's you're in the saving stage and the accumulation stage, or whether you're in the distribution stage of your lives now and you're living off of those assets. And so we wanted to just allow you to have a sense of what's coming down the pike, or it appears to be, and how you might be able to start thinking about these. We're not only going to give you the content, but we're also going to give you some of the critiques that are out there about what's motivating the federal government and both parties to want to drive this along a little bit further, and then also what this might mean in terms of specifically some tax strategies for you and your advisors in terms of making sure that you don't get caught short, winding up actually paying more taxes than you otherwise might have paid. So with that, Adrian, why don't you start walking us through this bill?
Yeah, of course, Erik. And like you mentioned, it's good to stay up to date on these things because there may be a lot of new options out there for you that might not have been there before if this legislation gets through. So it's really important to kind of see all the proposals and Secure Act 2.0 and see which ones apply to you and see if your options may have increased where you can maybe make some changes or just maybe review it with your planner or with whatever you do, just so you can have more flexibility in the future when it comes to retirement. So I'll start with the first big one, and I think this is the most interesting one, is now people can wait longer to take their RMDs. This is one of the big changes that the Secure Act 2.0 is promoting. And this would raise the age to begin taking RMDs, this time to age 75, and this will be over a decade. The age for RMDs will initially increase to age 73 starting on January 1st, 2023, then to age 74 on January 1st, 2030, and it would rise to age 75 on January 1st, 2033. So this is, again, a really interesting change because this means you could have more time for your money to grow tax-free. But if you also delay your RMDs, this means you could be withdrawing more larger amounts in the future. So I think this is a really important area where you should really plan out because the tax consequences are big here and withdrawals in the future might be larger. So being able to plan ahead, it can be really important.
Yeah, so let's, first of all, that's a great summary, and some of our listeners might be even scratching their head. We're so comfortable with the nomenclature of RMDs and required minimum distributions. Do you want to just give a quick summary of what that is?
Yeah, the acronym's RMD. It stands for Required Minimum Distribution. This is where you have to take a minimum amount out of your IRA when you hit, again, those ages that I just addressed. You have to withdraw a certain amount every year.
And that required minimum distribution is calculated using a formula using broad life expectancy assumptions that are in a table from the IRS. So they're saying if you're 70, every person who's age 72 has a specific life expectancy, male, female, irrespective of your health, irrespective of anything else, you have a certain life expectancy. And so whatever that life expectancy is on that broad basis, then you have to divide those remaining number of years of your life expectancy into the ending value of your IRAs and 401ks on December 31st of the prior year. And then whatever that is, then that's the share that you have to take out and make sure is no longer in that protected or tax deferred framework. So let's say my life expectancy, just to make this super simple, is 10, and I ended last year with $1 million. I have to take out 1/10 of that $1 million in the current year, or in 10%. That doesn't mean I have to spend it all. You might be able to just pay the taxes on that and put that in another savings vehicle, which would in this case now be taxable, but at least finally the federal government is saying, show me the money. So that's when they get paid. So why, Adrian, you mentioned some of the tax implications, and I think we're just, I love the fact that you're already dialed in on that question. Why would waiting until 75 instead of, let's say, 72 potentially have a tax impact, or what kind of tax impact could it have on our listeners?
Yeah, the biggest thing that comes to mind is if you are delaying taking your RMD because now this proposed legislation has given you more time, you might be withdrawing a lot more money, and this could really affect the tax bracket you're in.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's use that same example. Let's say just a moment ago I said you had $1 million in a 10-year life expectancy. let's change that. Let's change that to a 20-year life expectancy for a moment. And you were, let's say you had a 20-year life expectancy at age 72. I don't know if that's exactly the number, but it's in the neighborhood. So with that, now you take out 50,000 from that million. But if you went 3 years longer and your portfolio now had been growing at about 10%, by virtue of the fact that at age 72, 3, and 74, you hadn't taken out the 50, 60, 70 that were in there, your portfolio is somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100,000 larger conceivably, if you haven't been touching it. By the way, you're not prevented from accessing those funds earlier, but if you're for other reasons not, now your portfolio is a couple hundred larger. So when you apply the age 75 life expectancy, let's say it's 18 now, or just to make I guess we'll just use 18 as the example. It's not only the 18th of the money that would have been left there, it's the 18th of the additional couple $100,000 that was just left there. And as you just said, Adrian, that might push that would be certainly then pushing into either your existing top marginal bracket or potentially pushing you into a new marginal bracket. Now, what about, Adrian, somebody whose life expectancy, despite being 18 years or whatever it might be at 75, I don't think it's quite that long. But what if the hand that life has dealt you is a shorter life expectancy than the rest of your cohort, your age cohort, and you pass away at, let's say, 82. Now what's the impact of that?
Well, the impact would be more so on the beneficiaries, correct? Who the assets would go to.
Mm-hmm. 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 And coupled with the RMD rules, or the beneficiary rules, I should say, the inherited IRA rules for non-spousal beneficiaries, meaning your kids or someone else like that, if they got now what was a larger pool of wealth in that IRA, I'm sure they're not complaining about a larger pool, but since they're under this now 10-year rule and they have to take it out in those 10 years, it also has the potential to drive them into a higher tax bracket. So some of the critics of this bill are saying, yes, on the one hand, it looks like it's friendly to investors and it's friendly to retirees. But on the other hand, if you look in the final pages of the bill where it talks about the revenue implications of it all, if you're a little cynical, you'll say, maybe this was driven by trying to eke out more tax revenue by driving people into higher marginal tax brackets than the previous setup.
Yeah, Erik.
I don't know. Are you a skeptic like that?
I mean, you bring up some really good points, Erik. And again, since we're on the area of RMDs right now, and I mentioned this is a really big proposal that they're making, I just want to talk about one other aspect of RMDs that people need to consider again with this new proposed legislation, and then I'll move on to another area that I think listeners might think is interesting. So I think it's important that we talk about qualified charitable distributions, because this is a big part of people's RMDs, and the Secure Act 2.0 would enhance qualified charitable distributions, and they would annually index the $100,000 cap for inflation. So right now, people that are age 70 and a half and older can transfer $100,000 tax-free each year from their IRAs directly to charity. So I think this is really interesting how they're going to annually index this for inflation.
Yeah, so this is one of the marvelous opportunities for charitable givers who are over age 70 and a half.
Yes, it is.
And so do you want to just talk about or I can talk about, if you'd rather, the qualified charitable distribution and how that works compared to how everybody else gives?
Yeah, I'd love to hear it,
Would you like
Erik.
to talk about that? Okay, so for most of everybody who's younger than 70 and a half, or that's giving out of something other than their IRA, what's the typical way? Well, you make your gift, and then you itemize that on your Schedule A. And if you make it so that the combination of all the things that you've got going on in your life that are deductible, your property tax if you are a homeowner, your state income tax, your et cetera, if you have any interest debt on a mortgage, your charitable giving, if all of that surpasses what is known as the standard deduction for a married couple filing jointly in 2022, it's about $26,000, of which no more than 10 can be state and local taxes. So you would then put it on that itemized list, and if and only if it got above the standard deduction, then you get some credit about that portion that's above your standard deduction. So in other words, for many, many people, that first, $10,000 or $15,000 of their giving really isn't getting any sort of additional tax benefit for them at all, because it's already buried inside the unused capacity that they have in their standard deduction.
Yeah.
But when you use a qualified charitable distribution, which you are allowed to begin doing at 70.5, that comes straight off the top. So yes, the money is deemed as income as a distribution from the IRA, but it's every single penny that's given away through that qualified charitable distribution, or QCD, is then immediately subtracted from income without having to wait and see if it gets above that standard deduction. So I think it's a beautiful strategy, and the fact that, as you pointed out, Adrian, for really big givers, they're now making it so that it's indexed to inflation rather than sort of permanently fixed at $100,000, means that that'll just, over time, if that's left in place and that holds up in this Senate and then also when it crosses the president's desk, then that would be really an opportunity for some of our most generous listeners.
Yeah, exactly. And more money going to charity, that always sounds really good, and that's a very interesting piece. So I'm going to move us on to the next. Go ahead, Erik.
Adrian, let me just say one more thing about that. So that's why I would say, for people, those of our listeners who love to do charitable giving, this is actually one reason to not go pedal to the metal on Roth conversions.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a great point, Erik.
Because why would you want to drain every penny, and pay taxes on it at the point of conversion, when later you could take that money out and essentially use that for your giving, and by virtue of the fact that you're giving, you're paying zero taxes on that money. So, I mean, I just look at that opportunity, and while I'm on that point, even if you're not necessarily a giant charitable giver, but you're going to do some charitable giving, that ramification that I just outlined is important for you as well. Let's say you're giving $5 or $10 or $15 or $20,000 a year, or something along those lines, where for the most part it would fit in your standard deduction. You too, I should think, would, on that basis, then not want to completely exhaust your IRAs through the conversion process, because again, you'll have the opportunity to get zero taxes paid on that later on. Why do that with Roth money when you could do it at zero tax rate on IRA money?
Yeah, that's the important aspect of just planning right now, where again, this proposal, this piece of legislation is giving you more options and more flexibility now. So it's really important to kind of look at the numbers and see what would be better, again, when it comes to RMDs being delayed. Maybe the topic will come up, should I be doing Roth conversions or should I not be doing now? Well, let's look at your plan. Let's look at kind of what you want to do in retirement, where you want your assets to go, how you want to manage the amount of taxes you pay. It's, again, a lot of options, a lot of flexibilities really come up with a new proposal and new legislation. So I think that's all really good points that you brought up, Erik. And I'm going to move us on to the next piece of legislation, which is going to be a really good back and forth what we're going to have on this one, is the auto-enrollment and retirement saving plans. I think this is really interesting, where the Secure Act 2.0 would require employers to automatically enroll eligible workers into a 401k or 403b plan at a savings rate around 3% of their salary, and this will increase all the way up to 10%, and it does give the employee an option to opt out. So what was kind of your take on this, Erik?
Oh, I love it. I don't know, Adrian, in your work, you're obviously earlier in this career, but still, I bet you've had instances in which you've had clients that have come in and you're kind of stunned that at their workplace they don't have a retirement savings plan. And it's just like it's this small business, and the owner just never bothered to set it up, and so their only option for for saving for retirement is maybe an IRA or a Roth or just a taxable account. Have you seen some of that with some of your
Yeah,
clients?
there has been instances where this has happened, and again, this is a really good way to start out to saving for retirement. So again, this is a
Hmm.
really interesting new piece of legislation that is being talked about.
And just in that same spirit of expanding the access, because I think it goes right along with it, a number of people will work. I'm just using this. I don't mean to stereotype, but a stay-at-home parent who has been, once the kids are old enough to go off to school, is now saying, hey, you know what, I can pick up some part-time work. But because they've been working part-time, not full-time, maybe they haven't met the hourly, yearly, annual requirement for minimum number of hours to ever become really eligible to participate in the 401k of their employer. And so what this does is for long-time part-time employees, it also gives them a path to participating in that. But just so I think those kinds of expanding access for people is fantastic, and some of the incentives that were in this bill as well. I don't want to jump the gun on those, but coming back to this auto-enrollment piece, yeah, to say, hey, we're going to start you at 3. So if for in your situation, maybe you're kind of earlier in your career, you don't have a lot of margin, you don't feel like you've got a lot of surplus, hopefully this 3% withdrawal isn't going to feel like it's sort of cramping your take home so much that you can't make ends meet. And then gradually, year by year, automatically ratcheting that from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, all the way up to 10. Now, within 7 years, if you don't mess with it, if you don't opt out, within 7 years of your starting that, you're personally stashing away on a systematic basis 10% of your income, and you're getting that presumably matched by your employer. Now you're actually on a reasonable path to saving in a systematic way, dollar cost averaging, saving in a systematic way and dollar cost averaging for your future. I think that's
It
brilliant.
is.
I think
It
it's
is
a
really
wonderful
great,
thing.
Eric, and it's a really good saving strategy where, again, it's automatic. You aren't doing anything or going out of your way to save this every 2 weeks or every month, depending on how you get paid. It's
Hmm.
just coming out every time you get paid, and I think it's a really good way to start off saving for retirement and just building up your assets. It's really important. And you
Hmm.
also brought up and mentioned part-time workers. And under the Secure Act, companies that offer 401k plans are now required to allow employees who, I think, at least work around 500 hours a year for 3 consecutive years to contribute to a retirement account. The Secure Act 2.0 would reduce this 3-year rule down to 2. So
Yeah.
again, this is another opportunity, depending on how you work or how many hours you work, to again being able to enroll into your 401k plan automatically and just begin saving. It's extremely important. And there's
Hmm.
also incentives now to contributing to your retirement account. Do you want to talk about that, Eric? I think this is a really
Well,
fun area to talk about.
yeah. Well, first of all, I thought this was great. An employer can actually give gift cards to employees to incentivize them, just to reward them, incentivize them to start getting in and making contributions to their plan. I think, hey, you know what? It's just a little nudge. If a gift card is going to be the thing that's going to get you over the hump and actually get you to, take the steps necessary to save, I think that's fantastic. Hey, here's fill in the blank, your Applebee's card. And so go enjoy a meal on me, and let's get you started saving. I
I
love
mean,
that.
it's definitely better than nothing. So those gift cards will
Yeah.
be flying off the shelf, so to speak. So that's definitely
Yeah.
really cool. But since we're on the topic of like workplace retirement accounts and contributing to them, I think it's a great time to bring up another piece of the Secure Act 2.0, where workers who are age 62, 63, 64 would be able to contribute even more to these accounts now. And I think that's really interesting and really important, where if you have a 401k or 403b plan, you're allowed to make up you're allowed to do these catch-up contributions of up to now $10,000. I think that's really that was really interesting when I read that. What do you think, Eric?
Well, I'm delighted for 62, 63, and 64 year olds. I'm just wondering, doesn't that seem kind of weird? Just like odd. Why would you single out those 3 years and say, if you're that age, then you should be allowed during those years and those years only to increase your step up or your pardon me your catch up. I meant to say your catch up contributions by 10,000. But when you turn 65, we're going to have to drop that back down.
Yeah.
And you'll be at, whatever is the then existing number. Currently, I think it's 6,500. Yeah. I just thought that is bizarre. And by the way, I think they're introducing that on a phased-in basis. So if it were passed,
Yep.
I think the only what is it 60. If I recall, I didn't write this down, but I think it's only 62-year-olds in 2023, and then they'll expand it to 63-year-olds in 2024, and then 64-year-olds in 2025, if I've got that right. So essentially, if you weren't born before 1960, forget about it.
Yeah. It is interesting that they pick those ages, but I guess if you're that age right now, 62, 63, 64, you have a really great opportunity here. So like I said, it looks like it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Well, I said it exactly the reverse way. I think it's if you were born in 1960 or earlier, forget about it. If you were born in 61 or later, this would be open to you. There's another aspect of the catch-up contribution, though, that I thought was fascinating. Do you want to talk about the Roth component?
Yeah, this is very exciting. And this has to do with the employer's match, where you can have the contributions go in as a Roth contributions now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Erik? I think that's going to be very exciting for our listeners to hear.
Yes. So there actually were several Rothifications, if you will, of provisions within this. So one you just mentioned, that is that when the employer matches, which is typically the case, that the employer will match employee contributions. And by the way, there's a long story behind that. We won't get into it, but it's most often motivated by either the employer genuinely wants their employees to succeed in this way, or they've been incentivized also by something known as safe harbor provisions. So, but one way or the other, those contributions until now have been all pre-tax, meaning the employee is not taxed on those, but they're also then added into the balance of the 401k that is all pre-tax, meaning that once the employee retires and starts taking those funds out of the 401k, insofar as nothing was taxed on the way in, everything is taxed on the way out. That's how it has been. So every penny is taxed as ordinary income. But under this framework, then employer contributions or matches actually to the employee's contributions would be the employee would have the option of saying, you know what, I'd like to receive those not as pre-tax matches. I'd like to receive those as Roth matches, meaning if the employer adds, let's say, I'm just throwing in a number here now, throws in $1,000 as matches into my plan, I'll pay taxes on that $1,000 now. That'll be treated by the IRS as income I received this year, but it will go into the Roth part of my plan, meaning that when I retire, those dollars, when I take those dollars out, I won't have to pay any taxes on those. Further Rothification would be that all catch-up contributions, and this one, Adrian, you might have seen otherwise. I don't think this one had an opt-out on this one. All catch-up contributions, meaning contributions from age, when you get that extra amount you get to put in starting at age 50, all of those also would be Roth. Did you see that?
Yeah, I think I saw something like that. But again, it's a really interesting new piece of legislation. And I got to believe this has got to be a way for them to help kind of offset some of the other provisions in the Secure Act 2.0 by kind of raising a little bit more money, because people are now paying the tax ahead just to have that Roth money and being able to withdraw it tax-free. So it's kind of interesting to see kind of how this will play out in the Senate.
Yes, and in that sense, I think for some people, using the option of the catch-up contribution, if it's required that it be Roth, meaning it's required that you pay taxes on that money and you put in your own after-tax money into that part of the plan, I wouldn't be surprised if actually that has the effect, at least for some people, of actually reducing the amount that they put into their plan using the catch-up feature. So we'll see how that goes, but I do think it does. Even if it's not even if the intent is to derive more revenue for the federal government in the short term, I do think it will have the effect of teaching people, wow, there is real value in building some part of your portfolio that is after tax. And incidentally, for our listeners where this will be the case for you, then you'll have a larger Roth pool than, let's say, otherwise might have been the case for people who are 10 or 20 years older than you. In your case now, the options that you'll have when it comes time for planning for really careful, strategic retirement income withdrawal planning, it's just going to be that much more beneficial for you to take that planning seriously and really optimize the withdrawal sequences and combinations in such a way to minimize your long-term tax rates.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of just tax-free withdrawals may not seem very powerful now, but when it comes to retirement or your later years where you need to start withdrawing more and it's a make or break on what end of the tax spectrum you're going to be on, it's a pretty valuable tool to use. So that's going to be really interesting just to follow along and to see.
Yeah. And since Roth contributions don't have RMDs, that's another thing that, by virtue of the shift between shifting more of what will eventually be your retirement pool of wealth from the category of pre-tax, meaning you'll have to pay taxes on every penny that comes out, to after-tax, or specifically to the tax-free, I'll say Roth, that will also then diminish your taxable RMDs during retirement and help you manage your tax brackets well.
Yeah. Exactly right, Erik. So I want to move us on to the next section, and I think you'll be a little bit better at explaining this savers credit that the Secure Act 2.0, which would really just simplify the tax break by having a 150% credit rather than 3 different credit rates right now. So this is something that I think some of the listeners will really like to hear your take on this, Erik.
Yeah, so we can all agree, I think, that first of all, it's startling sometimes when you hear the numbers, the statistics about how many or what percentage of the U.S. population is not really saved for retirement.
Yeah,
and it's understandable. I mean, I would say if you're working with the relatively lower income for a lot of years, and you've just really got to make the choice between, gas in the car, food on the table, heating the house, versus, putting money into your retirement plan. I can understand how there would be this sort of natural tendency to prioritize what's right now and real and standing right in front of you right now, rather than packing money away for the long term. So what the Savers Credit does is incentivizes people to actually go ahead and save anyway. And how does it do that? Well, under the current framework, it gives a graduated credit for the amount of contributions that you personally defer into your workplace retirement plan. And it gives you a tax credit for those. At one income level, it's 10%. At another income level, it's 25%. And then still another income level, it's 50% of what you put in, you'll get back as a tax credit. And I believe right now, Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong, that tax credit can go as high as $2,000. So just think of that. You put in, let's say, $4,000 into your plan, and you're in that 50% tier, you get back $2,000 as a credit against the taxes that you otherwise would pay. So that's beautiful. That is a genuine incentive and encourages people to do that. And I think it's an improvement over, just thinking of it from a public it on a contingent basis, where that contingency is that they save. So that's encouraging that really good behavior. Well, with this new shift, they would do away with the 10% credit, the 25% credit. Everyone who is eligible for the Savers credit would get a 50% credit. But it will be capped at $1,000, not two, and the income test is going to be lowered. So where there will be a certain number of people that are currently eligible for the Savers credit that would no longer be eligible for any such Savers credit because they make too much. But still, I whether it's the current framework or the future framework, I love the idea of let's do that in a way that really incentivizes good behavior and sets people up in the long run for a more secure retirement.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be really beneficial in some people's cases, again, where they're able to just be able to save more for retirement with this new proposed legislation. So I think this was going to be really helpful for some people to really start out saving in a way that will really help them in the future.
Mm-hmm. What you got next, man?
So the next thing I have is that your 401k now, when you're contributing to it or not contributing to it, you can have an option now where if you are somebody that has student loan debt, you can have your employer match your payments that you're paying to your student loan debt to your 401k. I think this is going to be a game changer. What do you think, Erik?
Yeah, I do like that. I'll be honest with you. I have sort of mixed feelings about it.
Okay, yeah.
So, but I think on balance, I tilt toward liking the provision. So let's just explain this. So let's say you're 25, 30 years old, you're making student loan payments, and you're going, dang, these are so, this is such a burden paying these things. I don't have a spare penny to put into my retirement plan at work. I just can't do it now. I can't make ends meet and cover the student loans and put money away into the retirement plan. So under the current framework, then, well, too bad. You're not putting money into your retirement plan. You're not getting a match from your employer. Well, this would say those dollars that you're allocating toward that drawing or reducing that student loan debt, we're going to treat that as, we're going to reward that good behavior on your part of getting rid of that liability. While it's not saving for retirement, it's certainly moving your balance sheet in the right direction from, assets minus liabilities. If you reduce the liabilities, that's having the same sort of impact on your net worth. Let's incentivize you to keep going with that and not force you to wait X number of years before you can actually start saving into your retirement plan. Let's reward that now with employer matches. Now, so I said I have mixed feelings about it. I think what I think it partly does is it rewards debt. And Adrian, you probably know me. I'm not a giant fan of debt, and I'm sort of angry at the higher educational framework in this country because it does incentivize students to take on tons and tons of debt. Anything that you do like this that sort of rewards, the person who's paying down that debt, as long as they're paying that down. I just think in that sense, it at the margins at least mildly skews the behavior of borrowing. And I'm not a big fan of universities charging what they charge. And I'm not a big fan of students loading up on debt as if there's no future with which they're going to have to really, there's no downside to that. So anyway, but I would say insofar as it is incentivizing this, moving the balance sheet, I like that.
Yeah, moving the balance sheet is a perfect way to put it, where you're saving for retirement and reducing let's just say the liabilities, in this case, this debt that you have. It's going to be really beneficial. And I thought this was kind of a new and unique thing that the legislation is proposing that will help out some individuals. I think is going to be really cool.
So I'm gonna go on a mild tangent. I just want to say, moms and dads, please, please, please try to help your kids figure out a way to attend university and get that education, if that's the path that they're on, with as little debt as possible. And if you need some ideas about that, pick up the phone or send us an email, and we'll happily talk with you about that. I mean, there's There's, it's school selection is a part of the thing. A selection of the major is actually a part of the thing. In some cases, the scholarships that are available in certain majors are more abundant than in some other majors. So there's participation in the National Guard, and in different states, if you participate in the National Guard to a certain level, you get tuition covered. I mean, there's a lot of ways of reducing that, saving early on, getting your kids saving for that early on, getting them to, I won't go down that entire path, but anyway, Adrian, thank you for letting me go on that.
Well, you kind of bring up
rant.
the theme and concept to this episode, where there are a lot more options and flexibility people have with their plans, whether it comes to their retirement, education planning, whatever it may be. There are options out there. And the sooner you get started and the sooner you know what all your options are, it can help you come to a more informed decision. And that could be very valuable and very beneficial for you over the long term. That's why we're kind of listing out all these new pieces of the Secure Act 2.0, because if they do apply to you, you have the information so you can make a more informed decision. And we can also highlight something that maybe gives you a little bit more flexibility. So it's all very valuable, just information that you can use, I think is very important.
Yeah. Here.
So I went through my list of some of the most important aspects that I got from the Secure Act 2.0. Are there any on your list that you want to talk about right now with the listeners, Erik?
Adrian, I think you covered most of them. I do want to just say to our listeners, we're going to go ahead and post a couple of the two pieces of legislation in the show notes.
Yep.
So specifically, the House of Representatives bill was number 2954, and this you can go and actually at congress.gov is where you can look up all of these sorts of things. In fact, we'll put it in the show notes, but congress.gov is a great source for a lot of these sorts of things, and you don't have to necessarily read all 140 pages of the bill, but on page 2, there's a very good table of contents, and you can find what's in that table of contents and see if there are things that you want to pursue in a little bit more detail. We have, for example, one of the categories that we didn't really touch on that much is some of the changes that are being offered now in 403B plans. And for a lot of our listeners, they're working in, let's say, a nonprofit sector or schools or such, then the 403B plan rather than the 401k is the savings vehicle of choice. And there have been some downsides in 403Bs, I would say, relative to 401ks. And so some of the improvements that are made in these, you can track some of that stuff down. Then the Senate bill is we should just say maybe a word about that. So the Senate bill, it's still in committee. It hasn't been rushing along quite as long, and there's probably, from what I've read, about 60% overlap with the House bill. So that bill is Senate 1770, and I would imagine now with the March 29th passage of the House of Representatives bill, that the Senate will, at some point then in this Congress, consider that their bill, and then it'll go to reconciliation, and then the two will sort of figure out which elements of each of the two bills survives or is stronger, and after they hammer that out, then it'll go back to the houses for final approval and then to the president's desk. I think there's a really good chance that this is going to get passed. But on balance, I think there's a lot to like in this, and so it's it's just the one thing we want you to know about, because in our case, at least, given most of our clients, this isn't necessarily a perfect overlap with most of our listeners, but with most of our clients, at least, what we're going to be focusing on are the opportunities that this presents for more tax-savvy approaches to retirement savings. What are both the positive and potentially negative implications of some of these changes on the tax side? How can we, both within the lifespans of our own clients as well as in the transition of those assets to their heirs, how can we create as strong a family outcome as we can and minimize the amount that's handed off to the IRS?
Yeah, well said, Erik. Just there's some really great tax efficient strategies you can use out there. And with the Secure Act 2.0, that more options are now available for us to use in our plans and just to really fine tune or adjust along the way so we can be as efficient as possible when it comes to assets. It's really a great, it's really a lot to unpack. There's a lot that goes into the Secure Act right now. And just being able to plan ahead and see what applies to you, what doesn't apply to you, what may we need to change, what do we not need to change, is all something worth just having a conversation about.
Right. Well, so Adrian, I don't have anything more to say. How about you?
That's all I really had to say on the Secure Act 2.0. Again, just so much to unpack here, but there's a lot of interesting things in this new proposal.
Okay. Well, listeners, thank you so much for sticking with us. And if you're getting value from this show, we want to ask you again to share it with other people. Let them know that we're here. If you go to your favorite browser or your favorite podcast app, if you go to any of those, you can leave a review. That really helps us. If you don't mind, leave a 5-star review. And if you're thinking, I wouldn't leave a 5-star review, go ahead and just skip that process. Then you can go do something else with your day. But nevertheless, we're here for you, and we've been cranking out this material here to try to help really improve your shot at a really satisfying retirement. I hope you've found that this has been valuable to you, and so we'll look forward to talking with you next week on the next episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show.